Hello and welcome to another episode of SCP Cafe. We have something different today. We have a special episode. This is a deep dive on SCP-4504. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat operator, subreddit moderator, author, loving husband, dog petter, deep dive performer. This is something new. The reason that I'm picking this up is this is quite a long work, and it wouldn't really have gotten the due diligence that it probably should in the cafe show. So but I still wanted to cover it. So this is kind of where we're at. I am going to spend this entire episode just examining this one article. As I said, this is SCP-4504. It is titled The Handless Man, and this is a first-time piece by this author, who I'm going to pronounce as wmaitla. This is, as I said, quite long. It takes place over multiple iterations of the document, and I'm not going to do a full proper reading of it, but I am going to go more or less in that recap format and cover this in depth and just, give this the time that it deserves. So to kind of set the stage here, this is split out over 5 tabs. There are no images present anywhere in the article, and the active tab when you get to the page says current document, and then there are 4 tabs to the right of it, and they appear to be dates. There are November 28th, 2010, January 14th, 2013, December 5th, 2017, and September 17th, 2019. So all told, the work covers at least 9 years, and we begin at the end, because the current document states that it's current as of September 17th, 2019. And we have procedures that indicate that our skip is to be contained in a standard humanoid containment cell at a black boxed site with a secondary containment cell kept empty in readiness for an attempted containment breach. So we have an object class of Keter as well. So we have attempted containment breaches that have already, assumably occurred in the past. Its primary and secondary cells and the immediate corridors around them are to be fitted with halothane gas dispersal systems, which should be activated immediately if the skip attempts to breach. And in the event that that doesn't work, staff are to avoid entering its reach, and instead should attempt to incapacitate it from a distance using flashbangs, stun grenades, and halothane gas grenades. We are to avoid engaging the skip with kinetic weapons, water cannons, standard issue tasers, and pepper spray. And staff approaching it after it's been incapacitated should do so cautiously, given that it has in the past feigned unconsciousness in order to lure security staff close enough to strike them. Additionally, it's to be spoon-fed 2 50 milligram black-boxed tablets twice daily in order to treat its chronic pain and maintain its mental health, and medical staff are to ensure the tablets have been swallowed before leaving the containment cell. And as of November 29th, 2017, Site Director Sandoval has ended testing with 4504 in order to prevent future staff casualties. So that's ominous. Our skip is no longer allowed socialization privileges, and in the event that the skip displays non-compliant behavior, staff should remind it that it will lose leisure privileges if it continues in that behavior. So that is our opening containment procedures. The first thing you kind of look at is we've laid out a lot of bad stuff. This thing has breached containment numerous times. We found certain things that we recommend using and certain things that staff are to avoid doing. And this entity is apparently hostile and cunning, and can use this to potentially injure or worse to our Foundation staff. And it's also apparently sapient, or at least something that would something that would, not appreciate losing socialization or leisure privileges. So, and the fact that we have socialization privileges and leisure privileges gives it a very prison feel. And this is a theme that persists throughout the work. So that's our opening procedures. And we have the description that indicates that the skip is formerly known as Dennis Wang, a 35-year-old Chinese-Australian human male, and as a result of the use of its anomalous abilities on itself, the skip stands 2.64 meters tall, which I believe is about 8.5 feet, possessing distorted features and greatly elongated limbs. And these distortions render it resistant to both kinetic impacts and extreme pain, and the skip is missing both of its hands as a result of an encounter with SCP-082, and this is a hot link, you can check it out at your leisure, during a previous containment breach. And we go from there into the shtick, the gimmick of this skip. It can manifest 2 invisible hands at the end of its arms. The shape is proportionate to the skip's distorted body. Each palm is approximately 20 centimeters in diameter, and each finger is between 45 and 60 centimeters in length. So these are very long hands. The hands can warp space, allowing the skip to mold solid objects it touches with them as if they were only semi-solid. And it can manipulate any solid physical substance it touches with them, including glass, stone, steel, lead, beryllium, bronze, and flesh, as they distort the space containing the substance as opposed to acting on the substance itself. Somebody with a better understanding of physics and really high concept stuff like that might be cringing. I don't know, but I'm willing to continue to suspend my disbelief for that. Affected substances are rendered sturdier and more solid than they once were, making them difficult to break or damage with kinetic strikes. The skip cannot interact with solid objects with its manifested hands without distorting them, and the skip's hands have reduced effect on non-solid such as liquids or gases. And currently there's no known way to reverse these distortions in space. Attempts by the skip to repair affected areas simply create a second overlapping distortion, and staff and test subjects whose bodies have been affected by this anomaly report extreme chronic pain to the affected area. The flesh will continue to function as normal unless the distortion disconnects parts of the subject's body or exposes internal organs, and we found conventional painkillers to be only partially effective in mitigating the subsequent pain. So that's a pretty gruesome ability. They have, they can't even help it at this point. Anything that they do or try to touch with these invisible hands can cause, severe pain that we can't even properly treat with painkillers in anything that it touches. And it goes on to say that the skip readily admits to a deep-seated hatred of the Foundation, particularly its security personnel and past psychiatrists. The skip has repeatedly expressed a desire to escape containment, and to date, it has attempted to breach containment 83 times, resulting in 4 successful escapes from the site. And during its more recent containment breaches, the skip has not attempted to flee the facility, and instead, it seeks out and maims specific members of Foundation staff it bears a grudge against, and these have typically been senior security officers who've made decisions about the skip's containment that it objects to, such as restricting its contact with other humanoid skips, interfering with its painkiller regimen, or revoking its leisure privileges. And to date, the skip has not harmed a member of on-site medical staff, with the exception of its own psychiatrists, and has discouraged other humanoid SCP objects from doing so during containment breaches. So that is our opening description. We've painted a fairly vivid picture here of this distorted man with a truly dangerous ability, and is actively dislikes the Foundation. And we go from here to an addendum that simply reads that previous iterations of this document have been archived and are available to 4504 staff upon request. So this reads current document. So this is the current state of things as it pertains to this skip. Still hates the Foundation, no matter what's gone on in these intervening 9 years since we begin these logs, And going back into the procedures, we have some things that, we're still having to knock it out with halothane gas and, lots of stuff to try to keep this thing incapacitated if it does decide to breach containment. So, this seems fairly high stakes given the ability that it can warp space and it can warp solid objects. That lends itself very readily to being able to breach containment. Pretty hard to avoid having solid objects around the thing you're trying to contain. So I think the stakes are sufficiently set here. We have enough to go by to kind of say, okay, I see what we're doing, and let's go to the backstory of this. So we go to November 28th, 2010, and what we have are revisions are highlighted in blue, and it looks like 9 years ago this thing only had an object class of Euclid, and simpler procedures, it's to be contained in a standard humanoid containment cell. So at that point in time, the stakes seem to be a lot lower. He must be fitted with Midas class water cuffs, and this is something I know really nothing about, if they've just made these up or if this is something real. Water cuffs sounds made up, but stranger things have happened. It also says that to date, the skip has not harmed a member of Foundation staff, and in the event of a potential containment breach, staff should remain out of reach of the skip and incapacitate it using pepper spray, standard issue tasers, and water cannons. So the current document said don't do those things, and the old document said this is the way to go. And as a result of good behavior, the skip is currently allowed socialization and leisure privileges. So we have that's the entirety of the containment procedures as they existed 9 years ago. Much simpler. It hadn't done anything at all to harm Foundation staff. Presumably didn't bear them the level of enmity that they appear to have in the current revision. The description bears a large resemblance to the current document, as you would kind of expect, given that it's a human, except for one notable thing. In this previous description, Dennis Wang is obviously he's a 25-year-old Chinese Australian male at this time, standing 1.77 meters tall. That is a solid 3 feet shorter than what they were at the current revision. And for the most part, this is the same as the previous description. A couple of other differences are pointing out that the skip can manipulate any solid substance it touches with his hands, and they're not invisible hands at this point, it doesn't look like. It just says he has the ability to warp space with its hands. The substances rather, that it can manipulate include glass, stone, steel, data redacted, and flesh, as the effect distorts space as opposed to acting on the substance itself. And it struggles to distort non-solids such as liquids or gases. And most of this... there are some other differences here as well. We have a section here that indicates that attempts by 4504 to repair affected areas simply result in a second overlapping distortion. Animals subjected to 4504's effect have reacted in ways indicating extreme pain and distress. However, the distortions do not impact the function of biological tissue, which we covered in the current document. And 4504 has refused to participate in testing on human subjects. And we have an acquisition log here that he was acquired by the Foundation on March 12th, 2008. So this is from November 2010, so about 2.5 years prior was when we first picked up this person. And our Foundation agents detected a report of several small spatial distortions discovered in a shed in suburban Brisbane, and this is Australia. The property's landlord directed them to the skip who had lived there previously, and when apprehended, the skip entered Foundation custody willingly and without resistance, believing them to be agents of ASIO. ASIO is the Australian equivalent of the FBI, or the NSA, I should say, National Security Agency. So that is the description. A couple of small but significant changes, and there's a bit to unpack just in thinking of what this looked like in its first revision and now. We have more mentioning of testing on animals, refusal to test on humans on the skip's part. It paints the skip in somewhat positive light that they're refusing to participate in testing if they know damn well what the anomaly does and what it's going to do to somebody. We have an addendum, and it has two logs. And the further we go into this work, the addendums and these collapsible logs make up more and more of the narrative. And we begin with an excerpt from a psychiatric interview with the skip. The interviewer is a Dr. Weber. Dr. Weber persists through this work quite a bit, and Dr. Weber is their psychiatrist. And there's what follows is a little, the dialogue is a little shaky here. I think it improves towards the end. It doesn't start out super impressive. The gist of it is that the skip, appreciates the position that the Foundation is in, but would very much like to leave. It's been 2.5 years at this point, and the skip had agreed to no contact with family, but says that, you can't keep me locked up like this. I need to get out. I need to be outside. And Dr. Weber says, if you would like to request more time outside in the exercise area, I'm sure we can. And the skip says, no, I don't want time in the exercise area, and leans forward out of its seat aggressively, and the security staff tell it to return to its seat and calm down. And he says, basically, the state of things sounds pretty rotten. Said, the yard sucks. Oh, okay. I go outside to stand on some fucking AstroTurf, run around in circles for an hour or two. I'm still surrounded by 4 concrete walls. I'm still standing on concrete, no matter how much fake plastic shit you layer on top of it. I'm still being stared at by the same fucking prison guards with guns. It's depressing. I want to go somewhere where I can see the horizon. I want to feel real grass under my feet. I want to see an actual fucking tree, not just a potted plant in my room. Even security, even if they just walk me around the outside of the facility walls or something. I'm not a criminal, and you shouldn't treat me like this. Rather impassioned plea, and it is, I think, the high point of this dialogue in this excerpt. And to all of that, Dr. Weber replies, "I'm sorry, Dennis, but we simply cannot take that risk. If you would like, we can discuss alternatives, like painting a horizon mural on the inside of the wall." And the skip says, "Fuck, no, I don't. Look, it'll be fine, I promise. I'll do whatever you want. It only has to be for an hour or two. I'll do exactly what the guards say," and he gets cut off. "I'm sorry, Dennis, it's simply not possible. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss?" He says, "No." And they end it, and there was a closing statement that reads that the skip was escorted back to its containment cell immediately afterwards, and shortly thereafter it used its art supplies to deface the wall of its containment cell with the words, "You are here forever." The skip was subsequently ordered to remove the vandalism by security staff, and per the advice of staff psychiatrist Dr. Weber, the Black Box Site's exercise area was closed for 3 days while staff painted a mural resembling the horizon on 2 walls. So we have somebody that is, very much an articulate, reasonable person here that is, doesn't quite understand why they can't be cut loose. And I feel like it's worth pointing out at this point in the timeline, there's there's nothing in here indicating that the skip had ever attempted to breach containment. And it sort of evokes that the thought that we don't necessarily in our writing give enough credit to the anomalies and these anomalous humans and how they feel about the state of things. For the most part, this is a story element we don't really touch. Things will breach containment because they're hostile to humanity, or because something more, Saturday morning cartoon villain than, I feel like I'm trapped and I need to get out. And we're sort of setting the stage, planting the seeds for that sort of thing here. We go to a test log, and this involves our skip with the subject being an adult male pig, and the purpose of this test is to determine the effects of the skip's anomaly on a living creature. And we prepare for the test by placing the pig on a table with leather straps, and 2 researchers observe the test through a one-way window. We bring the skip into the testing chamber, and it's instructed to approach the subject, place its hand on it, and use its anomaly. The skip hesitates. Our research team prompts him to approach the subject, and the skip again expresses reluctance and is then reminded if it doesn't comply, it will be reprimanded. The skip complies, placing its hand on the creature's thigh and pushing into it, and the subject immediately begins screaming and thrashing against its restraints. Our skip retreats to the far corner of the room. The subject continues to scream, struggling hard enough to shake the table. And the fact that this is, this is a pig, this is something without sufficient intelligence to really comprehend what's going on is pretty disturbing. The skip requests permission to leave the testing chamber, but this is not heard by the research team due to the pig's volume. And after 12 seconds, he repeats his request loud enough to be heard. We instruct the skip to approach the table again and touch the subject, this time pushing its hand into its brain. Our skip expresses distress and asks permission to leave again. The research team reminds him that if it does not comply with instructions, he'll be reprimanded. He reapproaches the table and places his hand on the subject's head, tries to, but the pig twists its head around and bites our human on the palm, and the skip vocalizes distress, retreats from the subject, holding its bleeding hand. The testing is canceled, and our skip is given permission to leave the testing chamber. And so we close this with a statement that says that our skip was escorted to the infirmary by security staff, and en route, he reported feeling faint and lost consciousness. This was likely a result of security staff following containment procedures and placing him in Midas water cuffs, preventing the skip from putting pressure on its wound, and our research team was reprimanded for improperly restraining the test participant. So we've put this person in a really despicable sort of test, and this is it's really visceral, it's really disturbing, but it does what it's intending to do in a good way. We have immediately after this a containment breach report, and this was on 11/28/2010. So this is the same day as the time that this revision of the containment procedures in the article is sort of ends. So the incident for the breach is that at approximately around lunchtime, our skip breached containment during a socialization meeting at the cafeteria along with 2 other black box skips, and over the next 20 minutes our skip was able to breach walls and floors using its anomaly, freeing 13 other humanoid SCP objects. And although almost all were recontained, 4504 and 4 other humanoid SCPs breached containment and escaped from the site. And during the containment breach, the skip refused to use its anomaly on security staff, even in situations where it would have directly benefited from it. And it also attempted to discourage other humanoid SCP objects from harming staff, although this was ineffective in the case of 2 other black box SCPs, resulting in 16 casualties among site staff. And we have put MTF Epsilon 10 manhunters on the task of pursuing these escaped anomalies. And that is where we end this revision. So I want to see here, there is no indication here of when the test happened as opposed to when the breach occurred, but it is you get the strong feeling that this is very much a cause and effect thing, that we have shown them, we want to test, and we want to that we're going to continue subjecting them to things that they don't want to do, and we're threatening them if they don't comply. What I like here is that we're using all of the same tropes that we've been using. We're doing everything that you would have seen out of a Series 1 test log, but we have the added element of the skip feeling actively uncomfortable and not wanting to continue out of the reluctance to cause pain. And this time it's the Foundation forcing the skip's hand. So that's the big thing that I get from this second revision. We go to the third revision, which has its timestamp January 14th, 2013. So our containment breach was November 2010, late November 2010, and this is mid-January 2013. We still have an object class of Euclid, but our procedures are a bit more involved at this point. It is now it's still in a standard humanoid containment cell, but now the walls, door, floor, and roof of the cell are to be interwoven with a grid of live electrical wires. And these wires should be permanently charged with the same voltage as a standard issue taser to prevent 4504 from exiting its cell through the walls. And the spaces in the grid should be no larger than 6 centimeters square to prevent the skip from reaching its hand through them. Our skip must be fitted with Midas class water cuffs before any transportation through the site, and they are not to be removed until it returns to its cell. So I'm going to stop right there. We thought that potentially these water cuffs were part of the problem, part of the discomfort that our skip was having and caused it to fall unconscious, and we're using them anyway. And in the event of a potential breach, staff should remain out of the reach of 4504 and incapacitate it using pepper spray, standard issue tasers, and water cannons. And on the 11th of October 2010, our skip breached containment and escaped in cooperation with 2 other humanoid SCP objects, evading recontainment for a period of 7 months. It's a pretty good jailbreak. As such, our skip is denied socialization privileges, although leisure privileges may be provided to it dependent on good behavior. Our description is identical to the previous description, and what we have after this are a series of addendums, and they include incident reports, more test logs, quite a lot that we're going to get into here. So the timing of this is that our skip breached containment and escaped for 7 months in October of 10. And these new containment procedures look like they kick in roughly when the thing returns. So we have a series of incident reports that begin in June 2011. And our first incident, there are a number of them in here, is that immediately after being returned to containment, the skip immediately attempts to breach by breaking through a wall, despite having been informed of new containment procedures, and it contacted one of the electric wires, and received a painful shock. Staff entered the skip cell and subdued it using pepper spray. Staff sustained no injuries. The next day happened again, and this time the staff are instructed by the site director to only respond to attempted breaches if it manages to leave the cell. And over the next 5 days, it attempts to breach 9 different times. Every time it fails by hitting one of the electric wires and receiving a painful shock. And after the 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 9th attempted breaches, the skip received treatment from medical staff for 2nd-degree electrical burns. So for 8 days running, this thing has tried to breach and been basically tased for its efforts, but keeps doing it. The next day, it is in transit to its first session with Dr. Weber since re-entering containment, It attempted to breach, I should say, by assaulting security officers and fleeing from them while restrained with these Midas class water cuffs. He was subdued by security officers using pepper spray and physical force. And at their discretion, the security officers returned the skip to its cell, postponing its session with Dr. Weber for another fortnight in order to discourage future attempts to breach containment. The site medical staff treated the skip in its cell for a concussion and 2 fractured ribs. And security staff reported negligible injuries. So we managed to concuss our skip and break some ribs in the subduing of them. Probably a bit much, given that he's already got his, presumably got his hands behind his back. But so it goes, and we have another incident report from July 5th. So a good 2 weeks actually a little more, about 3 weeks have passed. And while attending a session with Dr. Weber, the skip became emotionally unstable and aggressive. Security staff subdued the skip using pepper spray and physical force before returning the skip to its cell. Medical staff treated the skip in its cell for a broken nose and dislocated shoulder, and security staff reported negligible injuries. So that's the end of our incident reports from this revision. We're seeing a different sort of entity here in this skip after it's been apprehended and returned to Foundation custody. So we go from here to a formal request log, and this log picks up 2 weeks after the previous incident, and our skip requests the holes in its cell caused by its breach attempts be repaired. The skip states they often spark loudly, causing him anxiety and difficulty falling asleep, and that they're unsafe to move around due to the electrical hazard. And this request is denied, the grounds being that we don't have another cell prepared to house the skip while repairs are made, and the chance is too great that this is just another attempt to breach containment, and those holes only exist because our skip attempted such in the first place. We reap what we sow, and it's signed Site Director Sandoval. We have another request from the same day that our skip formally requests the reinstatement of its socialization privileges. It states that the removal of these privileges for so long has caused it significant distress, and that the return of its ability to converse with non-staff persons would be greatly beneficial to its mental health. This request is also denied, as the skip has breached containment with the assistance of other humanoid SCP objects in the past. Allowing it this contact would inevitably lead to another attempted containment breach. The skip will have to contend itself with conversations with security staff and its assigned psychiatrist. So, 2 different requests that, from the Foundation's perspective, are simply not feasible. And these, given what we've been doing for the incident reports, we're sort of turning up the brutality a little bit. These requests actually, and it sounds backwards, they actually sound too reasonable for the Foundation to deny. I would have liked, given the way that we're building up this story, it's sort of a slow burn, but we are increasing the stakes here. I think I would have liked to have seen something even more reasonable, less likely to give the Foundation any real troubles or worries. I like to have seen something like that would have been denied, because these are actually perfectly understandable given the skip, and given that it has managed to breach a number of times. And as the site director laid out, this is actually there's nothing outright wrong with it. The trouble is that it breaks up the sort of rise and fall of the story. This feels more reasonable on the Foundation's part, and otherwise we're building more and more towards the Foundation seeming to be a little unreasonable. We go from here to a Psychiatric Report Log. This picks up about 2 months after the 2 formal requests, and our Dr. Weber reports that the skip is has major depressive disorder, given symptoms of depressed mood, irritability, psychomotor impairment, chronic fatigue, chronic insomnia, decreased interest in leisure activities, and significant weight loss. So we are prescribing 4504, a daily regimen of SSRIs to help combat this. And about 6 weeks later, we have another report that says the skip is refusing to take its prescribed antidepressants for the 6th week in a row. We have attempted to compel it to take the food by mashing, to take the pills by mashing it into its food, but that doesn't work because the skip refuses to eat food that could hide the medication. And the skip continues to insist that restoration of socialization privileges would be more beneficial for its mental health than antidepressants, and my attempts to convince it otherwise have fallen on deaf ears. We go from here to another test log, and our subject in this case is a D class, and our purpose is to determine the effects of 4504's ability on a human being. So our D class is restrained in a chair using leather straps. We have the same two researchers as the first test, observing through a one-way window, and our skip was offered the return of its socialization privileges in exchange for its compliance for this test, which is, there's some ramifications. So our experiment begins that the research team instructs the skip to approach our D class and use its anomaly on the D class's hand. The skip hesitates. The research team reminds the skip that if it does not cooperate during the test, its socialization privileges will not be restored. The D class vocalizes distress and asks the skip to not cooperate. The skip hesitates again. The skip apologizes to the D class and approaches him. He pushes the index and middle fingers on its right hand into the back of the D class's hand, and immediately the D class begins struggling against his restraints, screaming and vocalizing expletives. The research team asks the D class how he feels and if he's in pain. It's a good line. The D class vocalizes more expletives and confirms that he is in extreme pain. The skip apologizes to our D class again, eliciting more expletives. The research team then instructs the skip to push its fingers into the D class's forehead. The skip hesitates and requests that the experiment be discontinued, stating that the research team should have enough data. The D class agrees. The research team disagrees, reminding the skip that its socialization privileges will not be restored if it does not comply, and again instructing it to push its fingers into the D class's forehead. The skip apologizes to the D class. He pushes his index and middle fingers on its right hand into the D class's forehead. The D class resumes screaming at volume. The D class does not cease this behavior when the skip removes its fingers from his forehead, nor when the research team asks him to describe the sensation. The skip asks to be able to leave the testing chamber and return to its cell. The research team permits it to do so. End test log. Whew. We have a closing statement that says that we moved our D class to the infirmary and it was observed there for the next 72 hours. It reported extreme chronic pain where the skip had touched it for the entire duration of those 72 hours, reported that the pain did not dull with time and remained as painful as when it had first been subjected to the effect. It reported his thought process and cognitive capacity were unimpeded, but observed to suffer from insomnia, which he reported was due to his chronic pain, and even with the assistance of pain and somnic medications, our D class was unable to sleep, and after 72 hours requested euthanization, to which the research team agreed and ended the experiment. That is a very heavy-hitting test log. This is really, really, really pushing the bounds of cold, not cruel. This is honestly on the wrong side of cold, not cruel. And you wonder how much of this is due to a couple of bad apples. How much of this may be the status quo that we don't talk about? You know, if you think that any behavior that you observe once without trying is probably the average, then it doesn't paint a good picture of the foundation at all. We go back to a psychiatric interview with Dr. Weber and our skip, and we've excerpted out part of this. our skip has stopped cutting his hair and nails, no longer attending to basic hygiene, and it elaborates, it basically says, you would understand if you weren't such a shitty psychiatrist, and it explains it's because it's one of the few things he has control over. He doesn't get to choose where he goes, where he sleeps, what he does, what he eats, but he has control over this little part of his life. And we have, after this, another set of incident reports. So we have the first incident report that indicates that while in its cell, the skip used its anomaly on itself, bending the tip of one of its fingernails, and the skip was careful to avoid the tip of its finger so as not to distort its own flesh. And we presume that it was doing this to see if it could affect itself. And our senior security officer recommends that medical staff cut the skip's fingernails at the next opportunity. And the senior nurse cannot authorize this. The nature of the anomaly makes interacting with its hands without its consent unwise at best. That's probably a fair assessment. And if left alone, it's likely that the skip's nails will break on their own, or the skip will ask staff to assist it and cut its nails for him. Our second interview log indicates that while eating lunch at the cafeteria, our skip was overheard by security staff discussing the layout of the site with another skip. Security staff immediately removed our skip from the cafeteria and returned it to its cell, and the security officer recommends the immediate revocation of our skip's socialization privileges. And Site Director Sandoval agrees to this. Same day, socialization privileges are revoked. And given what they had to do to get them back in the first place, this feels, really, really beyond the pale given the context. We don't know anything. This is one of those, it's overheard by security staff discussing the layout of the site. That is one of these weasel wordy sort of things where you can potentially infer maybe an unreliable narrator. Maybe we're getting something where, it could have been something said in passing. It could have been literally anything where staff jumped on it and went straight to revoking socialization privileges. So it is probably not much of a surprise that the next day it breached containment. While it was being transported by two site security officers to its fortnightly psychiatric session, with Dr. Weber, the skip covertly used its anomalous ability on itself, stretching out the ring finger on its right hand with the Midas glass water cuffs it was wearing. And once the finger was approximately 45 centimeters in length, it used this finger to breach the Midas cuffs with its anomaly and slashed both security officers with it, killing them. It then extended its ring finger to over 1.3 meters in length and proceeded to the nearby humanoid containment cells. It maimed and killed the security officers it found there and freed the contained SCP objects, initiating a site-wide containment breach. And although most of the freed skips were recaptured, he succeeded in escaping the site along with 3 black box skips, and MTF Epsilon 10 Manhunters has once again been put on the job. And that ends this revision. So we've raised the stakes here very significantly in this revision. We have pushed this man too far, and as Site Director Sandoval said, we reap what we sow. So this is the third tab of 5. We go to a log from December 5th, 2017. Our one that we've been reading is January 2013. So whatever happened here was the state of things for a solid 4 years, actually almost 5. And we now have an object class of Keter, and the document is revised as of December 5th, 2017. Our procedures indicate the data is corrupt. Consult newer versions of document, as does the description. We have nothing but addendums in this piece, which is just as well. We haven't seen... they've basically done all they can to try and keep this guy contained at this point. So what we have, we begin with an excerpt from a psychiatric interview and there's a little bit of filling in the backstory here. We indicate that this is this meeting on September 19th, 2015 marked the 3-year anniversary since it was returned to containment after its most recent containment breach. So at this point, this begins with the skip saying, "Please, I can't take it anymore." And Dr. Weber says, "You're exaggerating. We've talked about awfulizing thought patterns. You have to be mindful of your mental illness." And the skip says, "It's not a fucking mental illness." And we have back and forth. The skip says, "I don't have depression. The reason I'm fucked up is because I haven't talked to another human being in 3 years. 3 years." And the doctor tries to get a word in edgewise, and the skip says, "No, listen, for once, just listen. I spend all day, every day, locked in a tiny little concrete room. The only times I even see other people are when the guards bring me my food, and they aren't exactly conversationalists. I can't remember the last time I got to talk to someone who listens. I can't remember the last time I saw the sky, because I've been standing on concrete constantly for the last, I can't even remember how long. But because I've been standing on concrete 24/7 since then, my feet are in constant agony. Animals at the zoo get treated better than me. They get whole enclosures to roam in, full of soft grass and beautiful plants under the open sky." And the doctor says, "Dennis, you're being irrational. You have plants in your room, as well as the rest of your leisure privileges," to which the skip replies, "3 potted plants and an Xbox don't make up for a total lack of human contact." Our doctor says, "Dennis, remain calm or you will be returned to your cell." And we basically... he says, "If you're suffering from foot pain, we can discuss options to help with that. We can provide you with softer slippers and carpeted mats for your cell." And the skip says, "Can I go back to my cell? I'd like to go back to my cell." And the doctor says, "Dennis, we still have 20 minutes remaining. Please don't interrupt me. It's very rude." At this point, the skip rises from its chair and flips the table over between it and the doctor. And the security officers respond, subduing the skip with pepper spray and tasers. Dr. Weber exits the room, and the skip is escorted back to its containment cell. So, got what he wanted. We have a formal request. Our skip formally requests thicker, softer-soled slippers and soft carpeted mats for its containment cell. Our skip has stated that it has developed chronic foot pain as a result of standing on our site's concrete floors, and it's the opinion of its assigned psychiatrist that granting this request will assist with the skip's mental health. This request is granted. The skip is to be provided with 1 large and one small Type 2 carpeted mats for its containment cell, as well as 1 pair of soft slippers. So we go from here to an incident report, and after being provided with its mats and slippers, the skip moved to the wall of its containment cell and attempted a containment breach. It made contact with the electrical wire and received a shock, and after a moment's hesitation, it did it again, receiving another painful shock. It contacted the wire 5 more times, and officers entered the containment cell and moved it away from the wire, subduing it with pepper spray when the skip struggled against them, and the skip repeatedly vocalized that it wanted to die. The response to this incident was that the skip was transported to the infirmary, where it received treatment for second-degree electrical burns. And once the initial treatment was complete and its cell had been repaired, it was returned there to prevent a possible containment breach from within the infirmary. Our security officers were instructed to respond immediately if the skip attempted self-harm or a containment breach again. An emergency meeting with Dr. Weber was arranged immediately. And we have another psychiatric interview between the skip and Dr. Weber. And our skip at this point formally requests the right to die, to which our doctor says, "All right, I'm formally placing you on suicide watch. Security officers are going to be checking on you for every half hour to confirm that you're okay and that you aren't preparing for another attempt at suicide. I'm also moving up our sessions to be weekly rather than fortnightly while you're dealing with this. You'll be provided with a regimen of SSRIs to help you." So we have another interview between our two, and this looks to be about 2 weeks later. The doctor asks the skip how they're feeling, and asks, and to which he responds, pretty shit, actually. The doctor asks, "Have you been taking your medications?" To which the skip says no, and he's been he's complaining about the suicide watch, that, they're coming in every half hour to check on him. They shout at him when they do and say, I got to answer like with words to make sure I'm not dying. But they keep, even when I'm trying to sleep, they keep waking me up. I haven't had more than a half hour sleep for a week, and it's really fucking with my head. To which the doctor says, I'm sorry to hear that, but these measures are necessary for your safety. We can't leave you alone until we're sure you aren't going to try and harm yourself again. Have you considered trying the medications? Once you feel better, we'll be able to take you off suicide watch. And the skip says, no, the meds won't work. It's not me. There's nothing wrong with me. It's this place. And doctor says, I'm sorry, that's simply not true, Dennis. You can't keep using your mental health to try and breach containment. It's clearly not healthy for you and is only making things worse. I strongly recommend taking your medications and complying with staff directions from now on. You might not understand, but we're doing this with your best interests at heart. Now tell me, how are the slippers and mats? Are they making things easier on your feet? To which the skip says, yes, they're really great. And we go from here to another interview. This is the last one was October the 4th. This one is October the 11th. So the next week's interview. And the doctor asks, how you feeling? And the skip says, great, doc. Freaking amazing. Been taking the meds like you wanted, and it really, really helped. It cleared my depression right up. Haven't had a suicidal thought all week. Really great. You're amazing, doc. Just the best. And the doctor's like, okay, thank you. Skip says, amazing, just spectacular. You've always been there for me, doc. Always listening to me and just helping me out. You must be the best shrink in the whole foundation. Just so great. And doctor says, Dennis, there's no need for that tone of voice. Skip says, no, wait, I mean, and the doctor cuts him off. Making light of the situation with sarcasm and mockery doesn't help anyone. If you're still having problems, you need to be honest about them, or else you'll never get better. And the skip says, no, really, I mean it. You've really helped me. I haven't had a suicidal thought all week, I swear. And the doctor says, I'm sorry, this is for your own good. I'm afraid you'll have to stay on suicide watch. And the skip says, no, please, doc, it's not helping. I can't sleep. I can't concentrate on anything. I swear I'm not suicidal anymore. I won't kill myself. Just let me sleep, please. And the doctor says, I'm sorry, Dennis. We have no choice. We cannot allow you to self-harm. I strongly recommend continuing to take your medications, and we can review you being on suicide watch again next week. And at this point, the skip rose from its chair and attempted to move around the table to accost Dr. Weber. Site security intervened, subduing him with with tasers and pepper spray, and the session was ended early. We go from here to another incident log. This is actually on the same day as the previous meeting. Our skip approaches the wall of its containment cell, uses its anomaly to make contact with one of the wires and received a painful electric shock, and then attempted sustained contact with the wire. The officers entered its cell and intervened, escorting the skip to the infirmary where it could receive treatment for electrical burns. While it was being treated, the cell was repaired, and the skip was returned to it after receiving treatment. And 4 days pass. It tries it again, does the exact same thing. We get the exact same result. Alternate methods of containing the skip are now to be explored, and security are to maintain a constant vigil on the skip to prevent further attempts at self-harm. So we go from this to another psychiatric interview 1 week later. And again, doctor asks, how you feeling? Skip says, good. Doctor says, well, that's good. And there's silence. Says, would you care to elaborate on what you mean by that? Skip says, all better now. Not suicidal. Drugs helped. Doctor says, well, that's very good news. I'm glad you were able to overcome this illness. Skip says, thank you. Can I go off suicide watch now? Doctor says, hang on a moment, Dennis. I'd like to ask you some questions first. Skip says, why? Doctor says, I'm just curious. You say you no longer feel suicidal, but I received 2 reports during the week that you attempted self-harm again. Is this true? Skip says, that was then. This is now. Don't feel suicidal anymore. Can I go off suicide watch? He said, I'm not sure that's a good idea, Dennis. Skip says, what? Doctor says, you say you feel better, but you're still demonstrating psychomotor impairment and depressed affect. You're unresponsive. Combined with the 2 attempts you made during the week, well, I'm not sure if your mental state is all right. My concern is that you may be malingering, lying, in order to be taken off suicide watch. The skip says, I'm not lying. I'm being honest. I don't feel like dying anymore. I've been taking the meds. It's good now. Doctor says, is that so? Skip says, yes. Took them every day, like you asked. Feel better now. Doctor says, really? So the guards must have been mistaken when they said they saw you hiding the pills in your pillow on your cell's security camera. And there's silence. The skip says, what? Doctor says, you're on suicide watch, Dennis. You're being constantly monitored. Did you really think you could get away with this? And this is obviously catching the skip off guard. Said, the things escalate. There's a lot of exclamation points. Have been taking medications. I'm all better now. Suicide watch not helping. Makes me want to die worse. And doctor says, calm down. I know you want to be taken off it, but I'm not going to risk that. This isn't part of some plan to get you a better opportunity to take your own life. I'm going to recommend you remain on suicide watch until 2 weeks after you start consistently taking your medication. Skip says, no, please, it's not helping. The drugs aren't going to help. Doctor says, I know you don't understand, Dennis, but I'm doing this because I care about you. Skip says, no, you don't. You don't listen. You just make things worse. You hate me. Doctor says, you're being irrational. I'm going to end the session now. We have nothing further to discuss. The skip then utilizes his anomaly, pushing one of its hands through the table ahead of it while rising from its chair, and before the security officers could react, the skip stepped through the table and pushed its other hand into Dr. Weber's head, then removed it in a slashing motion, and most of Dr. Weber's face and cranium was removed. Security officers moved to subdue the skip with tasers and pepper spray while it stood over Dr. Weber's corpse, swearing. In the ensuing struggle, the skip managed to make contact with a security officer using its anomaly, maiming his right hand and forearm and left leg, and despite this, security officer successfully subdued the skip and transported it back to its cell. So I feel like this was very much a Full Metal Jacket moment. Pushed too far, too long, too many times to not see this being the way that it went. We go from here to an incident report, and this happens, is this the next day? This was from October 18th. This incident report is from October 15th of... Yeah, interesting. This is set 4 days before. I feel like this would have been potentially an oversight in the timeline here. In any event, we have an incident report that after... this is definitely just backwards because it says, after returning to its containment cell prematurely as a result of its assault on its psychiatrist, the skip removed the mattress and sheets from its bunk and moved them into a position leaning against the wall besides the door into its cell. It sat down on the bottom of the mattress with its head resting on a pillow placed against the upright portion of the mattress. So it's kind of got the mattress set at like 90 degrees, sort of flopped on, an edge of the bed and against the door. And from this position, it proceeded to strike at any security personnel attempting to enter into its room. 3 attempts by security personnel to force entry ended in security officers being maimed by the skip once while attempting to enter while the skip was asleep. Our security personnel concluded the risk of forcing their way into the cell was too great and resolved to wait until it moved away from its cell door the following morning. Given the risk involved in entering its cell, the skip was taken off suicide watch but was still observed via the cameras in its cell. The skip slept in this position for the next 2 weeks, striking any personnel who entered its cell between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. The 5 personnel seriously injured by the skip were transported to the infirmary. After painkillers and somnic medication proved ineffective in treatment, the personnel amputated the areas where the skip had distorted the bodies of 4 of the officers. 1 officer's injury was to their abdomen and could not be treated. We then have a containment breach report immediately after this. At 0945, the skip breached containment at the site. It proceeded to rampage through the facility for the subsequent 3 hours, freeing 24 other humanoid SCP objects. Among those that breached containment... Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I'm reading this wrong. We had a black box skip that breached containment at the site, and it proceeded to rampage through the facility for 3 hours, freeing 24 other humanoid SCPs. And among those that breached containment were 4504 and 082. And what we have from here is that we have the 2 sort of working together, talking to each other, and our skip bows to 082 twice. 082 is observed to laugh and smile several times during their conversation, and the encounter was interrupted at 10:50 by site security. When it observed security officers approaching, the skip approached 082 and offered up its hands, and before security officers could intervene, 082 bit cleanly through SCP-4504's wrists, severing both hands. 082 was subdued by site security, and our skip was swiftly relocated to the infirmary in critical condition. So we go from here to a formal request. Our skip formally requests that it be reclassified from Euclid to neutralized and released from Foundation containment. It has reported that since the loss of its hands during the containment breach, it has been unable to utilize its anomaly in any form. The skip has stated it understands that any such release would require an amnestic treatment to remove its memories of its time in containment and consents to such a procedure. It states it does not expect an explanation or backstory for its disappearance or the loss of its hands and will be content with a simple return to its family. This request is granted. This is also not the end of the piece. So we grant the request. He's to be held in containment for 3 months in order to ensure its injuries are stable and that it is truly no longer anomalous. If these conditions are met, it will undergo a Class Sigma amnestic treatment on August 5th, 2016, and subsequently be released in Brisbane, Australia. The skip is to be dressed in the same manner as when it was acquired by the Foundation and released 3 streets away from its family's residence. We have an incident report. This is 2 days prior to its release date. While treating the skip in the infirmary, the nurse observed a small spatial distortion in the mattress of the skip's bed near its left hip. The skip quickly moved to cover the distortion with bed sheets and denied the existence of it. The nurse asked it to remove the bed sheets so she could check that there was no distortion. The skip initially refused, but relented when she informed she would have to call security if it did not agree. The skip moved the blankets, but attempted to conceal the anomaly by manipulating the bed's fitted sheet. The nurse observed the anomaly, contacted site security, which caused the skip to become distressed, and repeatedly state that it was no longer anomalous. And at 0850, security officers removed the skip back to its containment cell. Attempted to, I should say. The skip resisted, continuing to insist it was no longer anomalous. Security subdued him with pepper spray and tasers and moved it back to its containment cell. So, on the same day, we have a containment breach. At 0930, the skip moved to the wall of its containment cell. It placed the end of its right arm, where its hand formerly was, against the wall and used its anomaly while drawing back its arm. By doing so, it was able to remove a whole section of the wall, the approximate shape and size of its former hand. The wires contained inside the wall did not impede this motion as they were not contacting the skip directly. We've actually made this thing far worse. And after a 4-second pause, it repeated this motion about 25 more times, and it tore a hole in its cell wall and breached containment. It exited the cell and began breaching any other containments it found, using this new application of its anomaly to dismember and decapitate any security staff it encountered. MTF Epsilon 10 manhunters, again, put on the job after 10 minutes after escaping the site. The skip was reacquired by Foundation personnel a week later after following reports of a homeless man with no hands. It's a lot to dig in. This is a really long revision here. We have an incident report, and this is how we get to the state of things in the current revision. At 2300 hours on November 27th, 2017, after having laid in its bed for approximately 13 hours, the skip arose and removed its clothes. It then proceeded to use its anomaly on itself by placing the ends of its arms against itself and stretching its limbs and torso. Security attempted to intervene by threatening to activate the cell's halothane dispersal system, but the skip stated that after it woke up, it would again resume its anomalous activity, and we could not tell whether this was a genuine attempt at self-harm or a new manifestation of the anomaly, so the security officers remained outside and called for its assigned psychiatrist. And during this self-mutilation, it frequently expressed severe distress and pain. It began by elongating its limbs before moving on to its own torso, neck, and head. The process was crude, especially on its torso, which required almost 30 minutes to elongate, as its hands were not large enough to easily manipulate it. I mean, we've already laid out how painful this must be to do to others, and it's doing all of this to himself. The psychiatrist arrived partway through the process. He attempted to negotiate with 4504, asking why it was self-mutilating and reminding it that poor behavior would result in the revocation of its leisure privileges again. The skip responded with laughter, pointing out it had still not regained leisure privileges after a previous attempt to breach containment. And this doctor then stated that if it continued self-harm, it may be placed on suicide watch again. and the skip responded with aggression and threats, stating it would kill Dr. Strickland and that it knew the Foundation had been hiding antidepressants in its food. The doctor again pleaded with the skip to stop mutilating itself, stated that he and the other Foundation personnel cared about its well-being, to which the skip again responded with laughter. The doctor asked why it was self-mutilating and what it thought it would accomplish, to which the skip responded, "Why not?" The doctor continued to try to talk our skip down until it completed the process. It then breached containment, using the increased reach of its arms to disable the halothane dispersal system inside its cell before breaking out. Its distorted body shrugged off attempts to subdue it, allowing it to kill Dr. Strickland and several security officers. The skip then proceeded to rampage through the facility, maiming 12 security officers and killing 29 others. It was eventually subdued using flashbangs, stun grenades, and halothane grenades. Like I said, we pushed this guy to the absolute limit. 2 days from being let loose, and has it all taken away from him. He's basically given up his hands for absolutely nothing. And this is the state of things at this point. We have a test log. It involves 2 researchers. One of the 2 has been on all of these tests so far. Our subject is our skip. Our participant is D-class. So it's a little backwards. Actually, I think this is unintentionally backwards from the previous 2 formats. Our purpose of this test is to determine the size and shape of the skip's energy fields, which had been observed during its most recent containment breach to be larger than its hands were previously. We have a D-class restrained in the chair using leather straps, and we have our researchers observing through one-way glass. The skip enters the testing chamber. The D-class begins vocalizing distress and expletives, telling the skip to stay away from him. The research team instructs the skip to approach the D-class and use its anomaly on him. The skip approaches the D-class. The D-class continues to vocalize distress and expletives, asking the skip to stay away and not harm him while struggling to escape from his restraints. When the skip reaches the D-class, it bends down and shushes him. It places the end of its forearm on top of the D-class's head and reassures him that it will not harm him. The skip then straightens, steps towards the room's reinforced observation window, and asks the research team if they want to see what he can do. The skip then rushes the window and breaches containment while laughing. It proceeds to kill the research team and the attending security officers before escaping into the site. And security footage and post-mortem examination of the research teams from the resulting containment breach confirms that his hands are now proportionate to the new body. The palms are about 20 centimeters in diameter, and each finger is between 45 and 60 centimeters in length. And we don't know if this is the result of the skip using its energy fields to manipulate each other, or if they've grown in proportion to the rest of it. And in light of this new information, our containment procedures should be updated as soon as possible. Our D-class was, all future testing with the skip is prohibited by order of the site director Sandoval. Information about the skip's anomaly should instead be observed during its containment breaches. We've basically given up at this point. When it breaches containment, let's collect data then. And our D-class was returned to its cell unharmed. And that wraps up this 4th revision. A lot to take in here. Thinking back to the beginning of this, where he was talking. He's telling people, 3 potted plants and an Xbox don't make up for a lack of human contact. The absolute degeneration of this guy really falls entirely on the Foundation in this work. We go from this to an article that's dated 9/17/2019. This is the last of the bunch, and it involves the skip's new psychiatrist. So the first thing that's noticeable in this piece is that at this point, the skip prefers to be referred to as 4504, and says, "I haven't been Dennis in a long time." And our Dr. White says, "I'll keep that in mind, but don't feel the need to address me as doctor or doc. I'm here as a friend." And the skip says, "You're a doc, I'm going to call you doc, and you ain't my friend. You're one of them, trying to grind me down so I'll be a good skip and sit quietly in my little concrete box without bothering anyone. Now let me ask you something. You read my file, yeah? You know what I did to my 3 other psychiatrists?" And the doctor says, "Yes. I certainly hope our relationship goes better." And the skip says, "Well, that depends on you, doc. Are you going to put me on suicide watch?" And the doctor says, According to what I read in your file, Suicide Watch was largely ineffective. It was mainly used to punish you for noncompliance and was the precipitating factor in a number of your violent episodes, so no, I don't think I'll be recommending it. The skip says, you gonna try and hide drugs in my food? No. You gonna try and take away my leisure privileges if I talk back? No. If I tell you something's wrong, are you gonna listen? Or are you gonna argue and say it's really my fault? The doctor says, what? No, of course not. How is that supposed to help you? The skip says, well, fuck me then. You might be the best shrink I've ever had. And the doctor says, I don't want to jinx myself, but if your other psychiatrist did that, then yes, I might be. Is there anything else you wanted to ask me before I get started? The skip says, can you draw me a map from here to Site Director Sandoval's office with all the security patrol routes marked on it? The doctor says, no. And he goes, dang it. My cunning plan was foiled. So close, you witty Foundation types managed to outfox me again. My search for Site Director Sandoval's office continues. And, so the doctor wants to get some more information. There's some important pieces missing. The skip says, please don't say we don't know exactly how big your imaginary hands are, because let me tell you, that ended badly for the last guys. The doctor says, no, it's about your transformation. And I looked through your file. You've never really explained why you chose to mutilate yourself like that. I can't even begin to imagine how painful a small area of your distortions must feel, and you chose to do that to your whole body. Why? And the skip says, what do you mean why? I'm bulletproof. Regular guns don't hurt me. Tasers bounce off me. It hurts so much I can't even feel it if I get pepper sprayed. I'm stronger than any normal man, and my long legs and arms mean I can run faster and reach further than I ever could back when I was normal. Well, sort of normal. The doctor says, but despite all that, you've never used them to escape. You did this to yourself, but your file says during containment breaches, you're more interested in hurting security staff than you are in actually escaping. And the skip says, well, where would I go? I'm 9 feet of freak. I could never hide like this. If I walked into any town with people in it, they'd scream and run away. There'd be an MTF on me so fast they'd break the land speed record. The doctor says, but then why do it? Was giving up your chance at getting away really worth getting back at security officers? To which Skip says, fuck off. Doctor says, I'm sorry. Have I said something that upsets you? I didn't mean to. And the skip says, you said you read my file, yeah? You see how many of those escapes were working for me before I did this to myself? Says, well, they weren't as successful, yes. It's why I thought you did it, to make your breaching containment more likely. Skip says, wrong. I kept hoping I'd get away again. First time I got out, I was outside for 7 months. 7 whole months. Where I could down a street. I'm sorry, we're missing a word here in the sentence. I could go down a street with normal people, stand under the sky, go into shops. I got to eat whatever I wanted, drive cars, look at fucking trees. Then I got caught and brought back here. The next time I only managed to stay away for 8 weeks. Then 1. Now I'm lucky if I get a few hours outside of containment. By the end there, I wasn't even making it all the way off the site before I got caught and dragged back. I realized I was never going to escape. I looked around that little concrete box and I realized I was never going anywhere else. I was going to die in this site and probably in that cell. You guys took everything from me. Everything. I even gave up my hands, watched him get ripped off me by an ogre, and that didn't even get me outside. The prosthetics you gave me are crap, so I have to eat food like a dog. I was hurting so much. I couldn't remember the last time I talked to someone who wasn't staff. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen the sky. You guys took that from me. But you know something, Doc? You know what you can't take from me, no matter how hard you try? You know the one thing I'll always be able to enjoy? And there's a pause. And the doctor says, vengeance? Skip says, fucking A, vengeance. Lashing out at people who've hurt you so they hurt is something so basic, so fundamental, that even dogs understand it. I had nothing to lose. Worst case scenario, you keep me isolated from people, keep me trapped in my cell. I already deal with that shit, so why not? I'm already hurting so bad, it's not like it could make my pain worse, so why not? The doctor says, I see. Why not make yourself into a monster if you already got treated like one? The skip says, exactly. Fucking exactly. This way I can kill way more security, which is the only thing I get to enjoy anymore. And the doctor says, well, what about leisure privileges? Your file mentioned you were something of an artist. And the skip says, yeah, like that helps. Watching a TV in a dingy little room, watching a shitty little pot plant slowly wither and die. And how am I supposed to paint something good when I only ever see the inside of this place? Plus, most of it's really fucking awkward to use when you got no hands. The doctor says, well, we can start with that. I'm going to recommend a review of your leisure privileges to make them more accessible and enjoyable for you. I'm also going to recommend you be awarded socialization privileges again, and that you be escorted outside the perimeter of site once a week. And there's more silence. Skip says, what? The doctor says, that was something you asked for. Years ago when you first joined us, wasn't it? Being escorted around the facility once a week so you could see the outside world? You said it yourself. A lot of your violence occurs as a result of your feelings of powerlessness and emotional distress, which were in turn caused by your social and physical isolation. I haven't known you long, but it seems like letting you have these small privileges would vastly decrease both your distress and your violent tendencies. Of course, these privileges would be contingent on your good behavior, but you would understand that by now. I also can't guarantee Site Director Sandoval will allow any of this, but I certainly intend to argue for it, with your permission, of course. The skip says, Jesus Christ, Doc, fuck yes, I want this. Where have you been all this time? Shit, I'd kiss you, but I'm fairly certain that'd start shit with the guards. And the doctor says, yes, probably. Now, I had a few other things I thought you might like to talk about if you don't mind. And that's where we end this interview. A lot to take in here, too. Bringing them back into, making them seem like a human again. We have a formal request from our Dr. White. She formally requests the return of 4504's socialization privileges, also requests a review of its leisure privileges so they can be personalized so they are made more appropriate and more accessible, as well as the opportunity to be escorted around the perimeter of the site once a week. And the response is that the leisure privileges will be reviewed. The rest of this request is denied. Too much chance of a flight risk with this one, and that's signed Site Director Sandoval. So this is immediately subverted with another email. This is an email from our Dr. White to our site director. I will point out one little gripe I have that I actually talked about in the Week 8 recap show. These are at scp.foundation emails. Word to the wise, please don't use at scp.foundation. There's a good chance I own that in the future, and I would appreciate not having to have a bunch of shit hit my catch-all box when the day comes. But we have the subject of the formal request, and this is a letter. Says, "Greetings, Site Director. I know you've already responded to SCP-4504's request, but I would ask you to review your decision. As indicated in the attached documents and my further interview with it yesterday, 4504 is far less of a flight risk than it once was. Further, almost all of its violence is precipitated by feelings of isolation, powerlessness, and distress. Alleviating these would undoubtedly reduce its violent outbursts. I would also draw your attention to its history regarding its medication. Never once has it attempted to breach containment or harm staff while its medication was being delivered. Why? Because it understands that if it was to do this, it would lose access to the painkillers it needs. The skip has repeatedly stated that it needs to socialize with non-staff and it needs time outside. I believe if you fulfill these requests, 4504 will regard them the same way as its medication and will behave. And it is for these reasons I'm asking you to review your decision regarding SCP-4504's formal request." And it's signed Angela. And we get a reply, and it says, "Fine, but you have to go with it during the excursions, and I will hold you responsible if your assessments are inaccurate. Site Director Sandoval." And we have Excursion Report A1, and this is dated September 23rd, 2019. And it reads, SCP-4504 was escorted to the exit to the site by 4 security staff, led by the security sergeant. They were met by staff psychiatrist Dr. Angela White. Before commencing the excursion, Dr. White asked SCP-4504 how it was feeling. The skip stated it felt anxious and that it believed the excursion was more likely to be part of a complex decommissioning procedure than it was to be genuine excursion. The security sergeant informed the skip that it was genuine, but he would turn it into a decommissioning procedure if 4504 attempted to escape Foundation custody. The skip attempted to respond with aggression, but Dr. White interrupted and was able to redirect both parties by beginning the excursion. 4504 and Dr. White were escorted twice around the perimeter of the site over the course of an hour, as planned. 4504 did not attempt escape. The only occurrence of note was that at approximately 15 minutes after commencing the excursion, SCP-4504 began to weep. End article. So, to say that there's a lot to unpack from this piece is actually probably an understatement. But at its basic level, this touches very basic, commonly used elements and tropes that we've sort of set the standards of in the SCP universe. We talk about cold, not cruel, and this is a very intentional exploration of that, of what does that really mean? If you're cold for long enough, I think it becomes cruel. We are treating this person who is very much still a person, albeit an anomalous person, we are imprisoning them in a way that we very clearly do all the time. This is exactly how any anomalous humanoid would be treated. We have, we have this site. The thought process, and this is something that's been kind of going on in the comments on this, is this site behaving badly? Is this a rogue site? And you could actually sort of make the case that potentially it is, because the site is black boxed. Perhaps that is sort of an indication that there's more of a higher level, I won't say cover up, but we are covering asses by black boxing the site. And man, like just thinking about all of the different things that this touches on, putting yourself in the position of this person that has an ability that obviously is significant, but it's also voluntary. And this is how we go about working with them. We put them in situations that cause them very obvious distress. If you knew you had an ability that would cause incredible amounts of pain on something, and this very sterile, cold agency told you to use it on a helpless animal or a helpless person, and they're watching you and they're telling you that there are consequences if you don't do it, that sounds an awful lot like torture. And the fact is, we have test logs in plenty of established works that do the same sort of thing, but don't establish that. What this does really well is humanizes the anomaly. It gives them a depth that we don't actually normally give. We spend our readers' interest on other things. We want them to look at other parts of the universe that we've built, and it's kind of strange because at the heart of it all, the SCPs are what make the foundation, right? So, but what we instead do is there's been so much of a focus in the sort of, let's call it the modern age of the foundation, of building out the universe, making these skips that can be caricatures or, really, really memorable things. There's a lot of ones that are coming to mind when I think of, skips that are caricatures, but very few that have a real depth and evoke pathos and, evoke empathy for what the skip is going through. This is, I might make some people mad here. This is on the level of 231, in terms of evoking, sympathy and empathy for a skip. What it sets out to do is challenge the foundation on very basic tenets, and that is this cold not cruel paradigm that dictates a lot of the writing. And we say that, but now you're seeing what it really means. And that is, I think, supposed to, evoke some discomfort in you. These are allegedly the good guys. And, depending on where you fit and what sort of things draw you to the foundation, there are certainly plenty of people that identify more with the skips being contained. And if you are of that persuasion, then this is potentially a very disturbing sort of work, that it will really make you uncomfortable for having to, that you sort of identify on that side of things, where if you have perhaps a more, simple, pragmatic, from the high level the Foundation are obviously the good guys, we're doing all the writing from the point of view of the Foundation, then you still are faced with some uncomfortable truths here, and that is that the Foundation has collectively ruined this man and made him subhuman through its behaviors, treating them worse than a prisoner. And I mean, there's no civilized prison on the planet that's going to have you kill or maim animals or other people for something as simple as a data point that doesn't honestly mean anything, because you're not releasing this guy, and you're probably not going to press gang him into service, and now that you've made him actively hostile to the Foundation. So what's the point of all this? Why are you even doing this? It's senseless brutality, and it is something that Cold Not Cruel allows for. It's, we have D-class personnel for this. They're here to be data points. We have animals here, and animal testing, we actually, it happens. It doesn't get talked about a bunch, but that log in particular, really, really well written, really disturbing. Like I'm the sort of person that would rather, I'd rather me get hurt than, I'd rather hear a baby crying than like a dog, because I don't know, maybe that's no good. And if I ever had kids, I would change my tune. But, doing things like that and evoking very directly challenging you that you should feel some discomfort about what you are potentially supporting here. Now, there's some fairly critical comments on this one as well. One of which being that the containment in actuality of this guy would not be, the first couple of times that we saw what they could do and that they became hostile, we'd probably induce a coma and call it a day. Possibly. I don't know if that's really relevant. The fact is, we've done worse to less deserving people, and there's no narrative there. Yes, potentially fully half the items that the Foundation possesses could be more successfully contained by digging a big fucking hole and throwing them in, but that's not interesting writing. And what we're in the business of pushing good writing and building narrative through things other than locking in a box. I feel like just hanging your hat on that we could have contained it easier. And, maybe that does, there is a place for that. If, depending on how deeply immersed you get into this, it's hard for me to have that level of immersion in anything anymore, because I'm so thoroughly used to seeing how the sausage is made that I don't really think of it in those terms of, you could lock it up better. Like, I'll have other works and other skips where I would say, yeah, I mean, this is basically an anomalous item. Lock it in a box, let's throw it in the log of anomalous items. This is not a complete work. This is the complete work because we've shown that this site in particular is in the business of testing with this entity. For whatever reason, we want to keep testing with it. Maybe this is a really shitty site and it shouldn't be doing this, but it does anyway, because the site director has too much power to allow for things like that, and didn't see the writing on the wall until it was far too late, that they shouldn't keep pushing this fucking guy, past his limits. I want to point out, this is a first time entry. This person has never even put a cold post on this site. This is their first work. I am beyond impressed. I think these are the things that I really love, is when we don't get me wrong. I'm a fan of plenty of different things that I see on the wiki, obviously. I mean, I find plenty of them that I love every single week. But when we go back and challenge core concepts, that is something that I think we actually do very little of, and it's a shame. I mentioned back probably a month ago now, when we start talking about things like foundation ethics, it is probably the least the least explored area of the entire site, the entire universe of the ethical dilemmas and the moral conflict within the Foundation, and it really, really should be a bigger part of things. But we haven't done enough with it. There's too many, too much writing focused on the gee whiz, on the cool monsters, on all of those things. But there are far more terrifying elements that you can get just in examining human nature as it relates to the Foundation, whether you find them to be the good guys or the bad guys, the MTFs that are involved, the GOIs, the way that they interact with SCPs as we have in this work. There are so many ways to put people under pressure and exploit that conflict for your work, exploit the struggle of trying to do the right thing. Every bad guy in any sort of developed work, everybody, even the bad guy, thinks they have the right idea. They think they're on the right side of the law, on the right side of the matter at hand. And when you see, things like requests being granted or denied, things being denied that would, give a tangible quality of life improvement to them, to this skip, and saying, well, they shouldn't have fucking done what they did, and if they hadn't, then we wouldn't be having this discussion. That's, it's every little thing like that. The conflict builds. What they did a really good job of is very, very clearly raising the stakes and putting you in the position of understanding why this guy snaps. And every time he snaps, it's more and more dramatic, and it's worse and worse news for the Foundation. It's all built in a very organic, believable manner, and I simply do not have enough good things to say about this work, what it set out to do, and what it did. This is I really want to see more from this writer. In general, for all of you writers, I want to see more stuff that challenges the Foundation on core premises, on things like on this cold versus cruel, on something as basic as secure, contain, protect. Is that something that we're just that we've just sort of recite, but we don't actually put into play in the way that's best for everybody involved? That sort of thing does not come around all that often, and it is very, very rarely executed half as well as this work executed it. This is an absolutely outstanding work, and at right now it is at plus 54, only at plus 54 in 4 days, but plus 54 in 4 days for a first-time author is absolutely outstanding. And like I said, hope to see more. And with that, I'm going to call this one. This deep dive went deeper, went longer than I even thought it would. We're at 93 minutes and change, it looks like. So we will be back on Friday. I actually said February 29th on the Week 8 show. There is no 29th this year. So I'll see you guys on March 1st with the SCP Cafe Week 9 recap. Until then, keep reading, keep writing. I'll see you on the other side.